Hello, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the Custom Magic community. Today I wanted to talk about the Great Designer Search. So I've wanted to do some kind of videos in conjunction with the Great Designer Search. I just haven't done it because I've been busy doing preparation for myself because I'm doing the Great Designer Search. I hope to do well, get as far as I can. Um, and the essay portion just finished, and since the essays are in, there's not going to be any more essay writing for the contest. I thought I'd just go over my answers and some things I know other people have been saying for their answers. For those who are interested in the Great Designer Search and just in magic design in general. So the first question, you just introduce yourself, why you're a good fit for the internship. There's my full name, now you know it. Um, for my first paragraph, I just really wanted to focus on the fact that I'm pretty well entrenched in the custom magic community and I do design magic cards. I'm not just hoping to design them, I do it now. I have experience doing it. I work with other people in this community. Honestly, I think, those of us who spend a lot of time making our own sets and helping other people with their sets and their own cards should have a leg up. Um, and I kind of want to call attention to that because I honestly think that's the biggest advantage I have in this contest is just that experience because it's literally the skill that will be tested. However, I think, you know, we'll see how useful my experience actually is if I make it to the design trials and how well I do there. Because I think if this is an advantage, that's where it will be made manifest, not necessarily because I mention it in the essay. But that's what I led with because I think it's the most important qualification I have. I just mentioned what kind of a magic player I am. Giving some amount of identity is useful. Just maybe be a little more memorable. Playing since Ice Age. Uh, when I was a kid, I had an Ice Age starter deck, and I played a little bit. I liked this little story about, after a while, I came back to Magic because of two things. One was seeing this amazing art for Maria the Sky Ruin on the main page. Um, because before Magic hadn't really done a lot of different worlds. It was just kind of all generic fantasy and a place called Dominaria, which I didn't even know was the name of the place it took place. And seeing this really exciting new world with floating islands and people climbing over it, this cool adventure world, that was exciting and compelling and new to me, and that really evoked my Vorthos, as it were, to really care about the flavor of this game. And then the other thing was I started reading Making Magic. Um, I started reading Making Magic before I started really playing much Magic, which is kind of odd. But the design of the game attracted my inner Melvin. I was very interested in how things were structured and why they made certain decisions and decided what would be fun and what wouldn't and how it ended up playing out. I liked this story because I used it as a way to say, this identifies two different compelling things about the game. So it's a way of talking about myself coming into the game and also how I think about the game. And I really think resonant design is important, having this strong fantasy resonance, pulling players in that way. And then the meta game, having this vast community, a lot of different ways to think about magic and participate in magic, whether it's even just caring about the design of magic. And then I talk about my writing. I'm a creative writer. I have some very minor publication credits. I didn't put minor in the essay, so it sounded a little more impressive. But I've published some poems and columns and short stories and things like that. And just, being a creative person helps me be better at making sets. And I also do other game design as well. I've got one on submission to a contest, the board game design, that hopefully does well, but we'll see. And the main point of this was just to say that not only am I, a stan of magic and magic design, but that I have the tools to think about it more objectively in the context of game design in general, which I think is an important thing to say. All right, so now we can get into some more debatable things. And if you guys have any discussion or thoughts about my answers or what you would put or what other people put and why you liked or didn't like it, feel free to comment. Because I'm not 100% sold on my answers. I just kind of went with things that I felt like I could argue. Because one thing with these essays is it's very important to show you can argue your points. Because they're not so much looking for who has all the answers, but who thinks about magic in a way that they can work with that person. and benefit from having that person on their team. So, making Evergreen Mechanics, I thought, all right, well, what are the best mechanics that they like to bring back? And there's cycling, flashback, kicker, and potentially transform. There's reasons that none of those really work. Flashback makes the graveyard always live, and I think Wizards like having some environments where you need to care about your opponent's graveyard, and other environments where you don't. Maybe you care about a different thing. Maybe you care about hand size. Maybe you care about their life total. But having both of them together is just too much for a player. It's just too much, almost board complexity. So I didn't like flashback. Kicker has a problem in that most blocks have a kicker mechanic. So having kicker and then not kicker is a problem. It's also, it doesn't grok very well. Like, it reads a little weird if this spell was kicked, and I don't know. Like, it's a very clinical wording of a mechanic. And the thing about kickers, I always feel bad when I cast a spell without the kicker cost, which I don't like. So I thought about cycling, and I feel like cycling is great. Players always have it. It's kind of like candy, though, in that RNG knows players love cycling. They know that it solves a lot of problems that the game has. You know, they need mana smoothing. It helps sculpt bad opening hands to be something more playable, and so that more games don't just never happen. You actually have more games that do happen. But if cycling were always in Magic, and this is the counter argument I did not bring up in my essay, players will have much more reliable game states, meaning players will be able to cycle for the cards that they want much more reliably. You'll have more more repetitive gameplay, I guess is what I'm saying. There's a reason that there's deck floors. You have to have 40 cards unlimited. You have to have at least 60. And so that you can't reliably find the cards that you need. Giving cycling gives card filtering to all the colors. A response to that could be, if you bring this back Evergreen, keep it in blue and black only. Then blue and black have their Evergreen mechanic. It's a spell mechanic in some ways. Like, it's not really a creature ability, although it can be on creatures. But it kind of emphasizes blue and black's ability to filter and draw and get the answers they need and want in the right moments. Anyway, I didn't bring that up. I still think cycling is a pretty good answer if you have to add something to Evergreen, because of the reasons I mentioned. It helps smoothing. I said that. What did I say? Oh yeah, every set needs mana smoothing. Designers often struggle to make non-cycling smoothing mechanics to fit the needs of their set. John Laux did this with Dig in Penumbra, or whatever it was called, in Great Designer Search 2, and people were like, why isn't this just land cycling, or even cycling? And Ken Nagel even said, oftentimes I find myself designing mechanics like this and just saying, why isn't this cycling? So I thought, well, this kind of stops that from happening, right? If you're always going to have cycling, you're not like, all right, what's our cycling mechanic going to be this set? You already have it. It's called cycling. You don't end up with mechanics like Explore, which I enjoy, but aren't really elegant. They play well, but they're very finicky, and they take up a lot of text and complexity. You have to read the card a couple times to remember what it does. Having cycling be Evergreen means the mana smoothing doesn't hitch anybody up. This was a pretty popular answer from what I saw of what other people were saying. Some weirder ones I saw were Devotion, which was kind of compelling because, Devotion cares about color, and the color pie being prominent in mechanic is probably overall good, except that having Devotion be Evergreen is going to warp many limited sets towards being mono or two colored that maybe don't want to be. I could see it maybe deciduous. Other things I saw to be Evergreen. Somebody said Exert, and with the flavoring of, when blue freezes a creature, instead of saying tap target creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step, you could say Exert target creature. The flavor then isn't freezing anymore, though, which is kind of a problem. But, I could see Exert working. Like it, I think the current wording of exert doesn't require you to attack, and so you can exert, for abilities and different things. You could exert random permanents. I don't know if you can target something and exert it, but anyway, I thought that was an interesting way to also save rules text on cards if you kind of redefine exerting a bit. So that was an interesting choice. All right, removing something from Evergreen status. I've only seen one other person with this choice of first strike. Popular things I saw were Defender, which as soon as I saw, I hit myself in the forehead and was like, why didn't I pick that? Like, Defender's a downside. It doesn't often appear, and when it does, it's usually on something with 0 power anyway. And Equip. Equip was interesting because Equip is a keyword on equipment, which are Evergreen. But Wizards more and more does not print a lot of equipment at common. And I think the reason for that is, it creates repetitive game states. You lose a creature, you just equip the next one. A lot of equipment feels very samey. It gives 1 or 2 power or 1 or 2 toughness, or some random keyword like flying or haste, right? And it's very powerful when limited, deceptively so, such that they don't want a lot of it hanging around in defining formats or warping formats. Oh, another thing that people mentioned was making vehicles evergreen. I don't know that I agree with that, because there's a lot of complication with your first main and the beginning of the combat step, and it's not always obvious that your creatures with summoning sickness can crew vehicles. And also, that doesn't make a lot of sense anyway. Anyway, so removing mechanics. So hexproof was a popular one because people don't like prevention of interaction. But I think there's enough fun from hexproof, and development has gotten good enough at making sure it's not on problematic creatures that I think it's actually a net plus for the game. First strike is what I picked, and it was because I was thinking about Color Pie. I was talking with a Color Pie Tyrant about, if you're going to make changes to the Color Pie so that different colors don't overlap so much anymore, what changes would you make? And he had a lot of really interesting ideas. First strike wasn't something that we were talking about changing, but we were talking about the mechanic generally. And I realized that first strike sends mixed strategic signals. In white, it's a very good evasive, aggressive mechanic, as well as defensive. And in red, it's a really good defensive mechanic that can gum up the board in the color that wants to be aggressive. So it kind of sends mixed signals that way. It also sends mixed signals about the pie. White and green overlap with creatures a lot, and life gain, and +1/+1 counters, and just a lot of things. And, artifact and enchantment removal even. So one of the ways that they've been trying to differentiate this R&D is they have made green care more about the big creatures and white care more about lots of small creatures. So white, the color that's supposed to care about lots of small creatures, has this mechanic First Strike, which gets exponentially better on bigger creatures. And that's somewhat problematic. Without First Strike, if you replace that with something like Battle Cry, which obviously cares about having a wider board, that sends a better signal that white is about lots of small guys, green is about the big green guys with trample, or things like that. So, I suggest that. I also point out that nowadays R&D mostly uses First Strike as combat tricks. They don't actually do it on that much at common anymore, which was one sign that maybe this is a mechanic that we can afford to lose. But the thing is, First Strike combat tricks, it's just removal during the combat step. It's just smite when you're on defense or off. I forget which way it goes. Let's not do this. And so red already has direct damage combat removal in burn. White already has that in things like Righteous Blow, or the deal such and such damage to target attacking or blocking creature. So we don't need First Strike on spells. We just already have that removal. So no big loss. I do say that Double Strike I actually like a lot more than First Strike, because normally First Strike, it either works or it doesn't. Like, you either have the sufficient power that it gives you evasion, or you don't and it means nothing. Double Strike gives your opponent more interplay or counterplay, because they can choose to trade with a double strike creature before or as it gets its second strike off. Whereas with first strike, you can either block it and survive, or you block it and it's basically a chump. Double strike you can interact with more. It's also splashier. It makes for more interesting cards. And so I say maybe double strike can remain with an adjustment to its reminder text. Another thing about first strike is it's so complicated they had to create an entire combat phase in the rules for this one mechanic to accommodate it. I don't bring that up because that's kind of baked in to Magic at this point. But, that's to show it's pretty complicated. I wouldn't actually remove first strike, but if I were to look at the more traditional evergreen creature keywords, that is one that I could see them moving or changing or replacing with something else. And I do suggest, at this point, red and white would not have an evergreen creature mechanic, and I suggest doing a battle cry variant. It gives some dimension to red's attacking mechanics, like they have menace, which is an evasive way to attack. They have haste, which is a fast way to attack. Battle cry is a wide way to attack. Have lots of goblins, have lots of soldiers. And it makes sense, like this guy is just screaming and they go and they attack. I would make it so it gave +1/+0 to all attacking creatures instead of all others. So if you had 2, it's easier math, just +2/+0 to everybody. Not +2/+0 to everybody except the ones with Battle Cry, which each get +1/+0. It's just harder to math out. Teaching Magic to a stranger. This was a hard one for me to write. This has an obvious procedural answer, like, how to teach someone Magic. There's tons of articles about successful ways to do it. And, when I was researching a little bit, I just found one, and I read it, and I was like, crap, that's exactly, like, these are the exact same things I was going to point out in my essay. So I said, well, why not just call that out? Be like, if you're going to teach someone Magic, this is a good article. I do a lot of the same things. And I decided maybe the important thing in this question is, what's your strategy? They're looking to see, how do you think about the process, and what things do you see as being important or unimportant? And so I said, okay, well, procedurally, I just follow this article. You have to play with them. And then I just kind of listed some principles, almost like bullet points. And I think that works okay. Get them playing as soon as possible. You don't have to explain like the stack or other rules until it actually becomes relevant. Don't make all their choices for them, because then they're not actually playing, therefore they're not having fun. This is one I came up with on my own. I mean, I came up with all of it on my own, but this is not one that I saw mentioned in many other places, where you highlight the strategic tensions of the game you're playing. Like, so I've got my flying dragon, but if you find a creature with reach or a plummet or something, then you'll probably win the game. Or I kind of want to attack, but I'm worried you'll attack me back on your turn, so I'm not going to attack and I'm going to pass. That keeps them focused on winning the game itself and not on learning the rules of the game. Don't tell them about all the formats of Magic. Just the color pie is enough to explore for them, to feel like there's a lot to the game. And then give them cards, because collecting is a big part of Magic. And I thought this was a nice thing to say at the end, but it's an important point. Like, if someone is a jerk and teaches you Magic, even if they're good at teaching it, but they're a jerk to you, like, how do you feel about Magic? You don't want to play that game. The jerk is the one who taught it to you. Only jerks play Magic. What is Magic's greatest strength? I've seen some variants of this answer that were perhaps more specific, and perhaps I should have been a little more specific with this answer, but in preparing for the essays, I looked at the previous essay questions that had been given, and the first one was like, what is the importance of the mana system to Magic? And then the second essays were like, what is the importance of the color pie to Magic? And that's a pattern, because Mark Rosewater believes that there's 3 most important things that Magic introduced, and they are the color pie, the mana system, and the trading card game genre. And so I was prepared for an essay about the trading card game genre. Instead, I had this question: what is Magic's greatest strength? And I legit think it's the trading card game genre. That's how they make tons of money off of it. That's how people have the room and space to get super obsessed with Magic and all the new cards, all the old cards, all the formats you can play. Problem with this answer is it's very broad, but if you had to pick one thing, I don't see how it's anything but this that is Magic's greatest strength. And, you know, as I wrote this essay, I kind of struggled to kind of circle around the entire breadth of everything that gives to the game, which is what makes me think I could have been more specific here. I called it the meta game, like meta hyphen game, because I know that's how Rich Garfield talks about it, Richard Garfield, and how that was his design impetus. Like, he wanted a game that people could think about and play outside of just playing the game. And I think that revolutionized gaming, but is also part of what makes Magic to this day as strong as it is. Its greatest weakness, the mana system. I feel a little scared about this answer because obviously the mana system is one of the most important parts of Magic. And I wish I had just said mana screw and mana flood. At least I call out it's also one of the greatest strengths. And I point out that we know that this is a weakness because we have these absurd mulligan rules that have to be amended and updated just to let games happen, for the game to be played as consistently as possible. Too many games don't even happen. And I also kind of throw out that, you know, mana screw and mana flood sucks, but how often does it really happen? There's a possibility that a lot of that is just a poor reputation, that this is overstated perhaps a little bit. And I just point out that to a certain extent, perception becomes reality. I have friends where that's the reality to them of Magic, whether it's happened once to them or will never happen to them again. It's just too random. Lands are too random. Mana system's busted. And I'm not going to sit down and have a design chat with them and explain why the land system is actually amazing. They don't care. They just care about their experiences in the game. And the fact that these experiences can happen and happen enough that it's a thing is a weakness. And I think it's the biggest weakness in Magic that prevents the most people from playing it. I do a lot to kind of justify that. Yes, I know it's important. It does a lot of good things for the game. But here's how it's a weakness. We need mulligans. We need early mana smoothing because of this weakness. Mulliganing, in my opinion, should not be as important of a skill as it currently is, and I stand by that. Scrying and cycling are like similar headspace decisions that you make, but at least those happen in the game. It's not something before the game, and too many people are like, I was just screwed, wasn't nothing I could do. If there's scry and cycling decisions that they're able to make after the game has started, that responsibility shifts upon themselves instead of on the game design. So the mana system is brilliant, has acceptable drawbacks, but its weaknesses should be accounted for. And I think Magic actually does a good job of accounting for those weaknesses, to be fair. This isn't something I think necessarily needs to be changed a lot. I think making cycling evergreen does a lot for this, but as I mentioned earlier, that could also introduce other problems of, making gameplay too repetitive. You can usually find your bombs more easily, things like that. Which mechanic most deserves a second chance? The most is a little intimidating because there's a lot of mechanics back there, right? And I'm sure I overlooked some that would probably be better their second time around than Inspired might be. But I really loved the idea of Inspired, and most people don't think of it as a raid-like mechanic or morbid or one of those mechanics that encourage players to attack when normally they might not. But it totally is. Like, outside of the context of what it was in, outside of the set, you see a creature with Inspired, you're like, alright, so now I have a puzzle. How do I get this to tap? The number one way to get your creatures to tap in Magic is to attack, which is what designers more and more want players to be doing in their games of Magic, because attacking and blocking more and more is the most important part of Magic. It's a very simple, straightforward, and flavorful axis of interaction between two players. Inspired gets creatures to do that. But unlike raid and things like that, the opponent has a chance to prevent the trigger from happening, even though one player has already invested in getting that trigger to happen. The other player can counter it, as it were, by then using its removal on the creature before the untap step, which I think is positive and makes it different enough from mechanics like Exert and Raid and Revolt and Renown and things like that. However, in the environment it was in, it was designed into from the other direction. They were like, all right, we've got these auras that tap things. What kind of creatures would like that? Maybe creatures that want to untap. So thus, Inspired was born as kind of a gimmicky synergy mechanic to complement these weird designs that made your creatures tap. So, yeah, I point out, why it didn't work. And my favorite cards that had Inspired, I think that cycle that made you could pay when you untap to make tokens was good design. I think asking players if they want to pay for something before the draw step is kind of compelling space. And so, yeah, bring back Inspired. Favorite set, this was a super common response. I saw some people saying like Future Sight and Planar Chaos. Seemed like really easy answers. Like there's so much out there about how Mark Rosewater feels about that. I played back in Ice Age, but I don't remember enough about the early sets I played. I played very casually. I remember liking Homelands. But I didn't play it enough that I could write 350 words about it. And so my more recent answer is Cons of Tarkir. I loved making a limited environment for myself that I could draft with my friends because I loved playing Cons of Tarkir so much. However, Morph, even though that made it such a great limited environment, was just one extra mechanic that didn't fit with any of the other themes of the set. And so it's got to be kicked out. I didn't just talk about what the problem was, but what that means and what you then do. So we're cutting Morph. What does that mean? It means we can replace Outlast and Ferocious with something that takes more space and is a little more ambitious. Morph was used as a through line for the block that in retrospect wasn't actually needed. The factions did a good enough job of showing the time travel. And maybe Morph is then used in a different set with a more resonant theme that it has more ties to, like a noir or action or suspense thriller set. Other things that people picked, I said Time Spiral. Some people said Kamigawa because they really liked the flavor, and then they could easily talk about all the design problems of Kamigawa. Rise of the Eldrazi is a favorite for many people because of limited, but it also turned off a lot of players and subverted expectations so much and was such a break from the rest of the block that there's easy stuff you can talk about there. Those sets had also been talked about in previous Great Designer Search essays, so I'm glad that my set at least is, post GDS2. All the expansions, least favorite, Born of the Gods. When Theros came out, I was like, I'm going to start buying a box of every set. My box of Theros was kind of fun. I wasn't a huge fan of Heroic and Bestow. And then in Born of the Gods, it was just kind of more of all that, except minus the better parts. Like, there's no monstrosity. They had less devotion, which I thought was the runaway success of Theros. And then it introduced Tribute, which no one could remember how to play it, and Inspired, which I've already talked to you about, but as I said, it was the wrong environment. It was kind of designed into backwards and highlighted some really gimmicky synergies instead of what Inspired is naturally good at. So I say, yeah, another thing about Born of the Gods, it was the middle set of a 3-set block, and that just really constrained it a lot. And I think Born of the Gods is one of the reasons that they decided, all right, we can't keep doing this 3-set block stuff. Like, we're limiting our designs too much. We're handicapping ourselves. Because they didn't want it to go off in a new direction. It needed to support the set before it and the set after, which really limited what it could do. And you see this just in the structure of Born of the Gods. There's cycles everywhere. There's tons of cycles at common, at uncommon, at rare. Then it has the mythic 2-color gods, and then it has to continue the dual land Scryland cycle. It felt like over half the set was cycles, and it just felt like every card was part of a cycle. You're just kind of playing a structured set that didn't really have its own unique stuff going on. And then I said, there's reasons for this, like I just mentioned. It's just how it was structured, and it was a good structure. The reason there were all these cycles is because it helped there to be reliable ways to continue with your heroic deck from Theros. Um, there were some more devotion things you could do if you were drafting a devotion deck. And then it helped prepare the way for Journey by having enchantment creatures that weren't bestow creatures. It gave you ways to make enchantment creatures with the uncommon inspired cycle that made enchantment creature tokens when they untapped. And it continued the flavor stuff. So it just prepared the way. It knew the way. Alright, changing one thing. This is the question I had the hardest time with by far. I basically knew what I was going to put for numbers 1 through 9 the same day I got the essay questions on Tuesday. Number 10 I didn't know until Saturday morning. Planeswalker points. No one cares about them. They don't give you anything. I actually logged in to see what my Planeswalker points were and what I could do with them. They give me different little images I can share on Facebook and say, I am an F&M veteran. Here's an image of card art that means nothing. And that's the extent of it. And I thought, well, why can't this be... What if this was like an in-game currency, kind of like gold in Hearthstone, where each day you log in for gold so that you can buy packs or you can do a draft or things like that. Planeswalker points, there's no reason they couldn't behave that way if they could be reimbursable for something like Chuck E. Cheese points or whatever. There's some issues like, what if someone has built up 1 million Planeswalker points, they stroll into an LGS they've never been to before, and they're like, I'd like 300 standard showdown packs, please. So maybe it's not a physical reward. However, it's a great opportunity to promote MTG Digital next, and what if playing in real life could give you free packs digitally? That does two things. It gets people who are already going to F&M excited for MTG Arena. They're going to try it out to use their free packs. It also helps people who are playing online. They're like, man, I need more packs. I better go to F&M so I can get my, my monthly bonus of going to my first F&M for the month. Maybe I should go every Friday so I get the double bonus of attend every F&M for a month and you get double Planeswalker points for the month. This makes a lot of sense to me. I think they might have to change some of the infrastructure for that to help support that. But it just seems like a really smart way to get more people playing more Magic in more ways. And Planeswalker points, they're obviously not leveraging it for anything, so you're not losing much by trying this. The other thing that I really like, and I don't know if I explained it super well in my essay, is this faction buy-in stuff. I've been playing Legend of the Five Rings recently, which is it's a living card game that Fantasy Flight Games does. And Legend of the Five Rings was originally a collectible card game in the 90s. It's been redone a couple times. But it has always been about faction buy-in and faction identity. And at tournaments, you would get rewards, not just for winning, but for being the top player of your faction. The factions had rivalries. You really identified with your faction a lot. Even though there were a lot of different factions, there were like 7 or 8. Probably later there were more. But you really get a feel for each faction playing differently, behaving differently. Players of that faction behave differently. And it creates a lot of immersion and more investment from players into the game. Magic has all the tools for that. They have the color pie. You have red mages already. You have blue mages who love saying no. You have people who only want to play mono-black control whenever they can get away with it. But in Standard these days, you've got all these 3-color mid-rangey beasts. No one's like, oh, I play Team Energy because I'm a red player or a blue player or a green player, right? I think Magic would be healthier if it focused more on kind of this faction identity side of things, and not just for sets that naturally care about that already, like Khans of Tarkir with the clans, or later the Dragon Broods, or obviously the guilds in Ravnica. Just have people say, I'm a red player, and I brought my red deck to F&M. If you have more red making lands than other lands, you can say, this is my red deck, I'm a red player. And then at F&M, whoever performed best of all of the red players gets a foil borderless land from like the ones from the latest unset, whatever it was called. I can't believe I don't remember that set name. But yeah, faction specific promos. And then you can do so many more awesome things with this. If you're tracking how players are contributing points to a faction, you can say, all right, this season, this faction is the winner. The winner of what? Well, maybe for Dragon's Maze, they pick the guild that solves the implicit maze. You know, Golgari won more pre-releases. They got more points. The top deck at the Pro Tour was a Golgari deck. So the Golgari champion from that block is actually going to be the new Living Guild Pack. That changes the story, but can it also change the game itself? The Mirrodin Pure New Phyrexia thing, everybody still goes back to that as being, man, I wonder what that other set would have been like. Obviously, they couldn't have executed on that, but what if they did that on a much smaller scale? What if there were 5 spells, one for each main color? Lightning Bolt, Mana Leak. Okay, maybe not like that, but splashy, rare staples that will change the way a color is played in a future standard environment. And they say we're only going to print one of these 5 cards, and whichever faction, gets the most points from going to FNMs, the most total Planeswalker points attributed to that faction, plus a huge bonus for which color does best at the Pro Tour, to get people more involved in watching the Pro Tour. People are going to be all about that, right? Like, people care about the cards that come out. Use that to get them to care about how they play and to get them playing more and to be more invested in other people playing and to really identify with their faction. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for this. I think it could be executed a number of different ways, probably smarter ways than what I'm immediately suggesting, just to kind of show the scope of what could be done. But I think Magic has the tools for that and could really be using that. Anyway, that went longer than I thought it should. I don't know how interested people were in actually hearing my thinking through all of the answers. A lot of people who read this probably have their own essays that they've done. Really interested to see what people thought about my answers, other people's answers, what they would put. And multiple choice test coming up. I might do another video after the test has been submitted and kind of what I thought of the questions and what I thought the answers should be. Hopefully I pass. Hopefully you all pass as well. But yeah, this has been great. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.